I tried to disguise
Hi.
my washing machine. Oh, hi.
Well, we are starting our session, the agent author dynamic, and I would just like to welcome you to 7th Annual Broadleaf. Hope you guys are having a great morning and a good start to your conference. We just have a few housekeeping notices that we want to share with you before we get into our session. I know you're eager to hear our guests. First, if you have panelist questions for our session, please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen during the session. And we're going to try to get to as many questions as possible there at the back end of their conversation. So please feel free to put your questions in. If you feel like you might be in the wrong session now, or you're getting curious about other sessions that might be happening later, there are links for those sessions in the program that you received prior to the conference. Also, links are going to be provided in the chat. Probably not going to be giving too many in this particular session, but you can check out some additional information there. If you have a one-on-one pitch with an agent or a mentor, make sure that you arrive 10 minutes before you're scheduled. And there's going to be a provided link in the one-on-one room for you to reach that. So it's awesome that you decided to do this. You're great. We believe in you. So just be confident. That's a great thing you're doing. Our official bookseller for this conference, once again, is Foxtail Bookshop. The titles from all of our authors and some recommended titles on writing, such as Stephen King's On Writing, are available through Foxtail and can be found at the bookstore page on our website. That link will also be available in the chat for this program. Foxtail is going to be hosting our one in-person Author Palooza event, October 22nd at 1 p.m. And it's going to have several of our guests and panelists and some additional guests. So it's growing, it's huge, it's epic. I think there's 11 or 12 authors and professionals right now. So that's going to be a great time, so check it out. We're going to be hosting a lunchtime chat with our authors today and tomorrow. That's also going to be in the one-on-one room. So if you have a chance, please go there, connect with our guests. It's a wonderful opportunity. And we're also offering pre-registration this weekend for our conference. As Zach told you in our opening for the conference, we are going to be, yes, face-to-face, in person at the Decatur Library next year. And we are super excited to get back to our roots and have another great broadleaf experience for you. Finally, you can become a member or renew your membership when you pre-register. We are a growing nonprofit, so we really rely on your donations from our community to help fund these opportunities for new and developing writers and even solid professional writers. If you want to contribute, you can do that when you pre-register, or you can go to our donation page. So, welcome to our session on author agent dynamics. We have with us Andy Davidson. He is the Bram Stoker Award nominated author of In the Valley of the Sun, The Boatman's Daughter, and The Holocene that is releasing this coming Tuesday, October 11th. Andy holds an MFA from the University of Mississippi. He was born and raised in Arkansas. He makes his home in Georgia with his wife, and he wrote this, the amazing Crystal O'Leary Davidson, and a bunch of our cats. So welcome, Andy. With us, we have Elizabeth Kopp. For over a decade, Elizabeth Kopp has dedicated herself to the care and management of authors and their careers. She launched Kopp's Literary Services in Denver, Colorado in 2021, and her business philosophy is simple: to foster relationships across the industry that are equitable, transparent, and long-lasting. Elizabeth is currently seeking horror for all age groups, historical novels set in non-Western settings, issues-driven women fiction, and gut-busting rom-coms. Contemporary middle-grade fiction with a bold voice and a light magic will always have her heart, and in nonfiction, she is drawn to platform-driven memoirs and biographies. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to turn this over to y'all for your conversation, and I'll be back for Q&A.
Thank you, Crystal. Hi, Andy.
Thanks. Hey.
Guess what?
What?
I
Oh,
can't
yeah.
stop staring at this beautiful third book of yours that's coming out October 11th, and everyone can pre-order it now and buy it at your local bookstore. It's just, oh my gosh. I'm so excited to chat with you today about all things industry and books and spooky stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This be fun.
Yeah. So Andy and I talked about this, of course, beforehand, and we came up with some questions. So we're going to interview each other today, which should be fun. Kind of like the cast of Stranger Things when they get on YouTube and ask each other random silly questions. I don't know if ours are so silly.
Not as cool,
Not as cool.
on my end, not as cool, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think to start, let's talk about how we both got into this crazy industry. What sparked it for you?
Well, I've known about the desire to be a writer since I guess I was a kid. I went through phases as a teenager where I thought I would be one thing and I thought I would be something else in the creative world, animation, artist, that sort of thing. That did not work out because apparently you have to have skills in terms of drawing and things like that. So
You draw. You have some
I have very rudimentary skills in that area, and but I knew, I guess from maybe about 10, I was in the 5th grade. I had a teacher that sort of supported reading and writing daily on a habitual sort of basis, do it every time that we would sit down before class would start, we would write and journal. So I've known for a long time, I loved writing. I went to graduate school in 2001 at the University of Mississippi. I was there for 3 years. We wrote a lot of short stories. We wrote a master's thesis. All of us had to write a master's thesis, and everybody wrote short fiction, pretty much. And I graduated, and for 10 years did absolutely nothing in terms of writing. It wasn't as if it dropped off of my radar. I just didn't accomplish anything. I didn't finish anything. I couldn't finish a book. I couldn't finish a novel. And eventually I kind of just set it aside and focused on getting a job and living life. Which I guess when you live life, when you have to have a job, as everyone does in America, in order to put basic needs on the table, right? Food and shelter and clothing and all that. Sometimes jobs can get unpleasant. Sometimes jobs cannot be what you want them to be. And so I started out in teaching and then moved into a position that was more of a staff position as an instructional designer. And after about, I want to say 10 years of doing that, I just realized that it was time to make a move and try to be the writer that I wanted to be, or I was never going to be it. And so that sort of brought me to my first completed work around 2013 or so, which was a novel that had been based in a screenplay that I'd written because I thought for a while I'll try screenwriting. And it became quickly apparent after reading a couple of books, right, that screenwriting was out the window. I'm not going to be in Hollywood writing scripts.
Yet.
Yeah, right. Well, there's always a door in, right? And the door in was not just writing a script. So I had this manuscript, right? And this kind of brings me up to 2014 when Crystal said to me, you've been querying people, you've been querying agents about your vampire novel that no one wants to read. Maybe you should go to this conference that a friend of mine told me about in Tennessee, Killer Nashville. It's a crime writing conference, but they have these little opportunities to talk to agents, to have your query letter critiqued. And so I thought, well, I don't trust writing conferences, right? That was my first thought. It was I just didn't trust an organization that was trying to take a writer's money. And so I was very skeptical of it, but in the end, did it out of just a sense of desperation that something's got to change in the course of my life. This book has to happen, or this is never going to happen. And so we went to Killer Nashville, and the way that it worked, which you know this, but I'll explain it for the people who are here. Killer Nashville gave you 3 choices, I think, for agents to talk to. You basically paid $20 for about 20 minutes for a 20-minute session to have a first 5 pages or 10 pages of a manuscript.
Yeah, and let us be clear that I was not your first choice.
You were not my first choice. Yes. You were my second choice.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Right. No, my first choice actually, at the very last minute, had a family tragedy, and I got a contact from the conference saying, your agent's not going to be there that you wanted to meet with, because I had paid for 2 sessions. I had paid for the query letter critique and the manuscript critique. So I was told, your agent's not going to be here. You can either go with your second choice, or we can schedule something down the road when the agent's family situation is resolved, right? Well, because the whole point of going to the conference was to just meet an agent and see what an agent was like in, human form, as opposed to as opposed to a name on a letter somewhere far away. We decided, okay, second choice. And I don't remember, honestly, now why you were my second choice. I don't remember. I think my first choice was exclusively horror. Like it just seemed like on paper.
At that time, I don't even know if I had horror in my bio, honestly. It might have been like gritty thrillers and mysteries, but I don't think I was. It was before I got my Queen of Horror moniker, right? My right.
Well, no, actually, you are becoming that. But no, I decided, okay, we'll go to the conference, and we got there, and I think you and I met by accident. Before our actual meeting. We just happened to be in the same elevator, and you looked at my badge and I looked at yours, and my first thought was, oh shit. So what do I do? What do I do?
No, and I was, pretty green little baby acquiring agent at that point. So I was very nervous at that conference. And I think it's funny when authors are saying, oh man, I was so nervous to meet you and so anxiety ridden. And oh man, I remember, my first few years of conferences, I was sweaty and just super nervous, because this is how I make my livelihood too. I mean, it's a symbiotic relationship. It's, pick me, no, pick me. So yeah, I was very nervous at that conference.
Well, I remember we had prior to our one-on-one session that we were in a big group setting together too. That was, I think it was a roundtable critique of the same pages that you had already gotten and read. And I remember you were very quiet about the pages in that session. Like you said, I'm not going to say much about this here because we have a one-on-one session scheduled. And I remember another agent that was in that session. I don't remember who it was. Probably, if I did remember who it was, shouldn't name that person here. Who said some things about my paragraph that I remember thinking, that's not right. That it just like, that's not good criticism. And so again, like right before the meeting happened, which was following that roundtable session, I was terrified that like, this is just, nobody wants to read a vampire novel. Nobody wants to read whatever I'm trying to do here. And so I think when we finally met for the session, one of my first questions to you was, what am I doing wrong with this query letter? And your response was, do you remember?
Oh God. No. I mean, I remember telling you that I felt like you really had something special, but did I think that you were miscategorizing what you were doing? No. What did I
No,
say?
no. You said, this is a perfect example of a query letter. This is a
Okay.
perfectly written query letter.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
Which was the point where the nerves kind of settled.
Mhm.
And I sort of sat back and I just thought to myself, shut up and listen to everything this person says, because
Oh, hey.
you're about to learn something. So yeah. So that was,
Yeah. Oh, that's really lovely. Yeah. And I mean, I used that query, I remember, as an example, for other authors about just how to put it together and how to really use, your voice within the descriptor paragraphs. And yeah, no, I mean, I do remember everything about that just feeling so pitch perfect. And I think that something really magical that happened for us at that conference was realizing very early on, oh, both of us want the same things from this story. There wasn't anything that I wanted to irrevocably change that would have taken away the heart and the fear and everything that you were trying to accomplish in the Valley of the Sun. And I think that that's why we've always worked very well in our partnership, is because we're always working towards the same goal. Or if that goal changes, then having these really frequent, open, honest conversations about where we want your career to go, what we think a story should look like. It's such an honor that I always get to be one of your first readers, and we can talk through sticky plot points or various characters. Yeah.
That's one of the elements that really has to be there, I think, in terms of an author-editor or author-agent relationship, is trust. That's true for author-editor too, but in terms of author-agent, I have to feel comfortable that the person representing me has not only my best interests at heart, financially, business-wise, monetarily, all that stuff, but also artistically, creatively, like, you're going to be honest with me and not let me go in a direction that I feel like is, or that you feel like is a bad way to go, like there's
yeah, definitely. And I'm not going to take on an author who I think our goals or views, for their current work in progress or their career at large are going to diverge. And I think that's sort of the hard thing to explain to writers from the agency perspective. At least for me, it's not like, obviously I have to make a living too, right? I have to take on projects that I genuinely believe will sell to a publisher and someone whose career I can help build over time. But also, I'm not going to partner with someone who I can tell we're going to clash personality-wise, whose work I'm not genuinely passionate about, because I'm not doing them any favors. And I know that it's really hard to find an agent, and I know that it's a slog. And would that I could offer representation to everyone who came across my inbox or I met at a conference or whatever. But I have limited bandwidth because it's basically just me, running this ship right now. So I have to be very honest about what I can take on. And I'm not going to just say, oh, sure, let's work together if I don't really believe in the product, because at the end of the day, I'm a salesperson and I have to believe in my product. So what I can say, and what I think everyone should look for in their agent is someone who truly understands what they're writing and what they're saying, who they want to be as an author, and partnering with someone who can facilitate that.
There's such a subjective element to all of this that I've found in the last few years of doing this is, well, I guess few at this point, it's 28 years now that we've known each other. So could you, like, I talked about how I got started. Could you sort of rewind and talk about how you got started? Like,
oh, you mean you talked very eloquently about how you got started in the business, and you want me to tell everyone how I got started via Craigslist? That's what you want me to do? Yeah. So yeah, I actually got into publishing through Craigslist, which is kind of wild to think about right now, but I was very stereotypical in that I got my bachelor's in English Lit and communications. When I graduated, well, the year before I graduated, I went to New York. Well, actually, sorry, let me back up. So in college, my best friend and I, we would save up all of our money all year from various, odd jobs while we were in school. And then we used that money to move to New York for a couple of months in the summer and just, find whatever job we could and have a great time. And so the first summer I worked at a travel agency called Travel Zoo, which I still subscribe to. And then the second summer was when I was just randomly searching online, and I found an internship opportunity via Craigslist for a small full service boutique agency based in Manhattan, actually in Rockefeller Center, which was super cool. And I think that they were really desperate to hire somebody because I botched that interview. I had no idea what a literary agency even did. I just knew that I really liked books, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't know if I should go to law school, because at that time it was kind of peak recession, and there wasn't a lot of opportunities. And so, kind of to your point, it was like, well, I got to eat, so I got to take whatever job is available to me. So anyway, found this internship. Light bulb moment. It was, oh man, I found my people. I didn't know if I wanted to be in academia. I just didn't know, and so everything clicked. And then the internship was over. I'm originally from Tallahassee, Florida. And so I moved back to Tallahassee. I got a job as a receptionist at the Department of Environmental Protection, and I was utterly miserable. And then I got a call later that year from my previous boss, and she said, Elizabeth, I thought of you. And she thought of me because I was shameless, and I sent her Christmas cards, and made sure she didn't forget me. My assistant is leaving. Would you be interested in the job? She thought that I was living in New York. And so when I told her that I was still in Florida and could I have, a week or two to pack up my stuff and figure things out, she rescinded the offer. And I said, it was a Thursday. And she wanted someone there so the old assistant could train them immediately. So I said, well, if I can be in the office Monday morning at 9 a.m., will you give me the job? And she kind of laughed, and she was like, I mean, sure, if you can pull that off, then the job is yours. And so I used my savings. Luckily, I was renting a house from my parents. And so, very, very lucky and privileged that I had essentially a storage unit. While I got my act together, but I was in that office Monday morning, and then I was with the agency just shy of 10 years before I decided to open up Cops Literary Services in January of 2021. So I've been doing this a while. Andy, and you and I were talking a couple weeks ago about how it's really interesting. Our paths have both very much been apprenticeship types of models. So as an agent, I have learned, I feel like I'm part lawyer, with all the contract negotiations and physical contracts that I look through every day, and part therapist, which I didn't know was part of the job, but is actually kind of nice.
But then you took me on and you found out.
No, part editor, just there are so many elements to being an agent that I didn't understand or anticipate, and I got to know all of these really interesting facets so intimately. Yeah.
Since you mentioned the different things, the hats you have to wear, basically all of these different roles you play as an agent, I was thinking of, there's this line in the first Daniel Craig Bond film where he sort of grumbles at M. So you want me to be half hitman, half monk. So you sort of occupy a position in my brain kind of like that. Like, you're, on the one hand, you're a very calm, zen person with regard to like dealing with me, because I'm not, at least I am until I'm not. And when I'm not, you're very good at sort of handling me.
No, I wouldn't go with that, but no. Okay, sure.
Yeah. But you also have a very sort of hard-edged negotiating presence that I've seen at work. So I was wondering if, like, is that a role you play, or is that part of who you are? Is it, like, as an agent, do you have to step into these roles in a kind of performative way, or do they actually come out of some aspect of, this is who I am?
Oh, I like this. This is an interesting question that, gosh, maybe a little bit of both. It's interesting because growing up, I was always the very shy, quiet wallflower type of person, and I think that, especially moving to New York, having the experiences that I had in my previous agency, I mean, there were so many times I learned so much, and I was thrown into the deep end a lot. A good example, like one time my boss was sick, and I had to go in her place to the Romance Writers of America conference and take all of her meetings, and that was maybe when I'd been assisting her for about a year, and I think that in my career and in my personal life, I've had to make very clear and conscious decisions. I want people to see Elizabeth Kopp's 360 degrees. Like, I don't want, I never enjoyed being shy or being intimidated by public speaking, or all of those things. So I think that I just had a lot of growing up to do, and that has helped me take control of the piece of agenting that you have to take control of to be a successful agent, which is, how do you firmly advocate for your client? Because at the end of the day, I don't work for a publisher. I work for my author, always. And I want really wonderful relationships with editors and publishers. I mean, that's such an important part of the job. And I've always adhered to, you catch more flies with honey versus vinegar, whatever. However, I'm not going to allow a large entity, a large corporation, to just steamroll my author. Authors have to fight tooth and nail to get to the point. I mean, better than anyone, to get to the point where you're publishing with any publisher, let alone a big 5 imprint. And I think one of the things that I wish authors knew, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here, but just because you partner with an agent, and just because that agent sells your book, to a publisher, and right now I'm thinking of large publishers, big 5 in particular, or big 4, I don't know what we're calling them now, but that doesn't mean that all of a sudden you can go skipping off into the sunset and you never have to really worry about your career. I mean, it's just getting started, and there's so many things. There's so many working pieces. It's amazing to me that a book even gets published because there are so many hands on it, especially once it gets to the place where a publishing contract has been signed. And I look at Hollywood and you see the credits, at the end of the movie, and you think, oh my God, there's, quadruple the amount of people who work on a film. How does that happen when so many hands on a book can make it really difficult? Because if one person drops the ball, then everything can implode. And there's so many things that can go wrong in the lead up to publication. And that is one of an agent's jobs, is to make sure that all the balls are in the air. And no matter how hard an agent, works at that, there's always going to be issues, right? With any book, with any publication, no author is safe from that. But at least the author knows when they have a good agent that someone can write the strongly worded email to the editor or to, the director of marketing or whoever it is on the team, to shield the author from that, because those power dynamics can get a little uncomfortable sometimes. And so being able to lean on your agent in the uncomfortable moments and know that they'll be your heavy is such an important part of this process. I know that I always have your back.
Right. Oh, and I can't
elements. Yes.
I can't tell you how many writers I met early in the process. So some at Keller Nashville, where I met you, and then others after that over the years at conferences or at events, who say my agent checked out, or I had an agent. Here's a horror story about how that went. They stopped contacting me. They couldn't sell something, and it's never quite been. I've never heard the story that Stephen King talked about in On Writing, which made him sort of famously declare that you don't need an agent until you're making enough money for someone to steal. But I think what we see nowadays with publishers that sort of start up and fall by the wayside very quickly is that you don't have to make hardly anything to be stolen from. I mean, there are publishers who will take your work and not pay you. And I've seen that time and time again from writers who work in the horror genre, but also any genre.
Yeah, definitely.
So I do think like that's something that's worth underscoring, is like a steady, long-term, dependable agent is invaluable in this profession.
Yeah, and you should be with someone who has had a lot of experience with the legalese, with the vernacular, the vocabulary of the industry, with handling, all of these documents. But something that I see sometimes is even my authors will be very quick to sign something that they know I've already looked at. And it's like, oh, well, if Elizabeth signed off on it, then it's good to go. When I'm sitting here thinking, oh God, no, please look, read every document, read every contract, with a fine-tooth comb, and come to me with questions, because this is your business. And I'm lucky enough to be able to take commission on your business, but at the end of the day, it's your name on this document. And especially for authors starting out, in the industry, there's so many things that why would you ever know, how to read a royalty clause, how to read an out of print clause, what to look for with option language. And so making sure that you're partnering with someone who can answer your questions and being honest. You've asked me questions before that I've said, you know what, Andy, real good question, no clue, going to find out for you.
Right.
And so making sure that your agent can admit when they don't know something or they're wrong or, whatever. But having those conversations about the business side, and making sure that, the money and the numbers really are checking out, is so vitally important. So, yeah.
One of the questions that we sort of threw around here that I think we've almost touched on inadvertently that we were going to talk about, is this idea of what are some of the things that we wish we'd known in the very beginning of all of this. So there's the writer side of that, and then there's the agent side of that. So
yeah. What about you? Want to go first?
Well, I was thinking about it in terms of when you were talking about the power dynamics between publishers and writers. When I first dreamed of doing this, I would go to the library, my public library, and I would pull out Stephen King novels and I would read them. And I would go to the writer's market at the library when I was getting into, starting to take creative writing courses, and eventually, buy my own writer's market. And I would flip through it and I would find publishers, and I had no idea that some of these things would come into play, like a publisher who, well, I guess what I'm thinking is, like, in terms of that power dynamic, the writer is actually at times subordinate to the publisher. You imagine in your head that nobody is more important than the writer in this dynamic and relationship, but the publisher is very often up here and the writer's here, and the agent's here with the writer, and the agent gets up here and fights with the publisher, and it
the
never,
publisher has the purse strings.
Right, and whoever has the money has the control. And
Right.
so one of the things I think I wish I had known was that, and not that it would have changed my desire to be a writer, but I certainly would have gone into it with a more comprehensive notion about what my part was going to be in all of this, as opposed to just this sort of, one day I'm going to accomplish a dream and write a book, and see it in print. And I think I've done that, but I've also, the other thing I think I wish I had known was that there is no end goal. Like, there's no finish line with this. Like, you don't accomplish the dream and then sit back and, as you said earlier, just, that's it. We've made it.
Yeah.
It's always ever receding.
And to that point, it's so interesting because at my previous agency, my boss had a lot of hard-hitting New York Times, USA Today bestselling authors. So people like Sandra Brown, or Mary Balogh, who's a very popular Regency romance writer. So when I was first introduced to what services a publisher provides to its authors, apart from publishing a book, I saw these publishers bending over backwards because the marketing budget and what they were willing and able to do creatively from a publicity standpoint for these authors was just at such a higher level than what a debut author should and can expect, or a mid-list author. And I think that, I went in perhaps assuming that publishers did a lot more for their authors than they actually do. And what does a reasonable budget look like? And so I think that, I wish that perhaps I had prepared some of my debut authors a little better in those early days, in terms of, what to expect with, coverage, not only reviews in various trade publications, but social media coverage, which has transformed quite drastically in the past decade. And that's something that you and I talk about frequently, is the onus on the author to really cultivate that social media presence. I mean, you're someone I use as an example all the time on how to do Twitter, which is, and you laugh about that because recently you were saying, God, Elizabeth, like, of all the people who, figured out Twitter and took to it and made myself, you know, a good solid platform, I never expected it to be me. But I think that, you know, you have a real genuineness, you know, obviously, you know, to you as a person and how you interact online with other people. And that's what I tell authors all the time is, you know, you can't rely on publishers, again, for that social media component that you used to, and things are changing all the time, and there's new platforms popping up, and now like TikTok is, I don't know, like, what's book talk? What are we doing? I don't know. but I do think it's safe to say that Twitter is still one of the most or more popular publishing social media platforms, and learning early on how to engage even before you have a product that, you know, you can put sale links or, you know, a cover or whatever. Like, how do you engage with your fellow literary community? And again, I think that that's something that you've done so beautifully.
I remember how hard that was.
Yeah.
That was incredibly hard in the first couple of years before I had a book to actually put out, because it felt like you were just sort of wandering onto the internet and grabbing passing people and saying, hey, I like that shirt, or hey, nice job, or you know. And in the early days of me being on Twitter, I think I followed a lot of writers who were in the same boat, who did have products to put out, whether they were self-published or whether they were with small presses or whether they were with larger presses. That was in the days, I think, before any writer of a certain age knew how to use Twitter. And so you see it a lot less now, but at the time, I remember in 2015, 2014, my feed, I mean, I probably followed 200-300 people, but my feed was just constantly like these ads for terrible, you know, terrible covers of like books that, and we've all gotten more sophisticated now. Like, it's hard to find a bad cover for a book almost, no matter who's publishing it. I mean, they're still out there, but yeah, so yeah.
Also, so I'm so sorry. I just clicked, I was looking at the chat, but I was supposed to click on the Q&A section. You want to click on that, Andy, and we can answer some of these, answer live?
Yes.
Okay. So since we were just talking about social media, I just want to quickly answer George's question. How much time is Andy spending on social media, and what does he do to engage on which platforms?
I spend way too much time on social media, just in terms of like what social media does to your brain and how it wires you to expect that punch of dopamine every yeah. No, I mean, so that goes without saying, but in terms of like using it as a marketing tool, I promote things when I have things to promote, but and usually I work on Twitter. I have a Facebook presence, but it's very sort of just tied to Instagram. So if I post something on Instagram, it goes to Facebook. I'm just kind of not fond of Facebook. I can't, I don't know, for a lot of reasons, but I think that's a key thing is like, you mentioned like, what is book talk? So like for me, there is a line in the sand in terms of what social media I will engage with and won't, because I'm not hip and cool and I don't want to pretend to be, but B, there's only so many hours in the day, and you know, I've got to write too. So I think like, I've found there's no data, like to answer this question, there is no data, there is no analytical way to say, how does social media help me as a writer?
And how does it affect sales at the end of the day?
Right. How does it?
It's the larger question, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Bottom line is, when I say, how does it help me as a writer? How does it, like, how many books does it sell? I have no idea. what it does do is foster connections and community among people who love books and who love writing, people who review books, people who read books, people I would have never met if not for social media. And so in that regard, to George's question, I think like the benefit of social media is that you get that community of people who begin to know you. And I think authenticity is very important as well.
Yeah, and opportunities tend to open up, whether it's, I'll blurb you and you can blurb me later, or I want to do an event and I thought of you, when a book is coming out. I do think it opens up human connection in an interesting way. But to your point, and to kind of, answer Zach's question too about how essential is it for an author to have a Twitter account to promote their work, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Book Talk, it doesn't matter. I will tell you that publishers are consistently asking me now when I put a new author on submission is, do they have an online presence? What does their platform look like? The word platform, I would say, is probably more integral if you're writing nonfiction. And so, if you're writing a memoir, like, well, what makes you kind of stand above the crowd? What makes your story appealing to a mass audience? Do you have accolades that would help a publisher position you in the marketplace, that sort of thing? But no matter what, I do think that it is important for a publisher to see that an author will also help amplify, kind of hate that word, but amplify what they're doing, on their end, and how can the author, grow that audience even further that a publisher is trying to help them establish. And I do believe that social media is the key to that, for better or worse, these days. So I do think it's important to be connected, and how connected you are is up to you, but you can start slow and build. You can always build.
Well, Zach has another question here that's a really good one, Elizabeth, at the top. When looking at agents, what are red flags and green flags to keep an eye out for? Yeah.
I saw a thread on this actually on Twitter that just absolutely blew my mind the other day, which was an agency. I think it's a newer agency and I can't remember the name, but they had this whole sort of diatribe on their website about how if they offer representation, they don't want authors asking them any questions. Because they've been in this business for a while and they know what they're doing, and you just need to trust. And if they offer and you accept, then that's it. It was just so wild to me. I want people to ask me a million questions before they agree to work with me, and I want them to look over my agency agreement and really ask themselves if this is what they want to sign, and take it to a lawyer if they want to take it to a lawyer. It's just telling an author, my way or the highway, don't ask me anything, speak when spoken to. That, to me, that is like the biggest red flag, because that's no communication, that's no transparency, that's no honesty.
Along those lines, a green flag is also an agent who is willing to put you in contact with some of their clients to let you talk to writers that the agent represents. I've done that on Elizabeth's behalf for people. And I think she did that for me when I first was considering signing with you, right? Like
yeah, absolutely. And there's been times when you have spoken, to potential clients, and ultimately they haven't signed with me, and sometimes they have. And but
just to be clear, it's not because of anything I said.
No, that came out wrong. But
it's because they made a mistake.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, sure. But I'm just so happy to give them the option and opportunity. And I'm really grateful to authors like you, Andy, who say yes. And, of course, I'll tell you, about my experiences working with Elizabeth, and I'll be really honest. And so thank you for that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's a couple of more complex questions here I think we can get to, though, in the next 10 minutes or so if we want to.
So Jonathan's is interesting. Do you want to look at that one?
Yeah, it's like,
I'll
I
read
guess, yeah, go ahead.
So Jonathan says, it sounds like, Andy, you took a risk working with Elizabeth when she was very new as an independent agent. And Elizabeth, you took a risk on an author in a genre you didn't have a lot of experience representing. Could you all speak to that? I asked from a place of querying agents seeking to build their list in a genre that they've not yet represented much or at all, i.e. they've represented a lot of literary fiction, but no fantasy, etc. I mean, I can quickly say that even though I I guess two parts to this. I grew up as an avid horror reader. From the time I was a little kid, doing the whole R.L. Stein, Goosebumps, Fear Street, then moving on to Christopher Pike. And anyway, I've always loved horror. But the industry did not call it what it was until very recently. And so I think on my bio, again, I probably had what, Andy, like dark thrillers and mysteries, or gritty.
Possibly supernatural thrillers.
Possibly supernatural, yeah, which
Yeah.
is interesting. So I kind of had to, even though I knew that I liked horror, I didn't really know how to identify it in a way that I could sell as an agent. So I think that Andy was kind of my gateway into being able to call it what it is. You're the reason why representing horror in a larger way has taken off for me. Like I owe that totally to you. But anyway, I know that's only part of the equation here. So if you want to speak to,
well, I would just say I
really
didn't
taking
know.
a risk with me, yeah.
I would say I wasn't taking a risk because, on the one hand, like immediately upon meeting you and listening to you, I had supreme confidence in like everything you said. You come across that way. But on the other hand, I would say from the writer side of it, I didn't really know you, but I had nothing to lose. Like I was not in a position where I didn't have an agent. I wasn't transitioning from one agent to another. I didn't even expect to have an agent when we first met. I was completely expecting to just walk away from that experience with good information.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not sure that I would characterize it as taking a risk. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure about the second half of the question about the agents who are building their list outside of areas that they haven't represented. I know one or two writers who have agents that are very good at selling one thing that a writer does, but not good necessarily at selling the other thing. But that's from the writer's perspective. Now, from the agent's perspective, which I don't hear, it could be that thing is hard to sell. So,
I mean, I've taken risks definitely in my career, things that genres that I have not tried to sell previously, and it's ended up working really well. And I've also taken risks that have not panned out for me. And an example of that is I really haven't been able to break into the YA space. And that's something that was so popular, especially during my earlier days of an agent, that I was trying to tap into so hard. And for whatever reason, I just don't think that I have the right eye for it. And so I've really taken a step back, whereas middle grade, for whatever reason, I do. And so I think that, Jonathan, when you're talking to this agent, you should ask them, well, what is your submission list going to look like? What are some, editors, some publishers that you're thinking of submitting to, and why? And then also asking them really pointed questions about your project in general. Like, do they share that same enthusiasm and passion that you do? And that's going to be very clear in a conversation, and do a Zoom call, because you can tell a lot about a person's face. So, I know, especially the past couple years have been really hard to do things in person, and conferences have been different, but at least we have the technology of video chat. So, you know, interview them, make sure that they really see what you're trying to do, talk to them about future projects. If it's something that they want to represent multiple genres that you're writing, if they have a plan for that. So I think that you can go into it with pretty open eyes. There's no guarantee 100% that they'll be able to sell this, but I think you can tell if this is just something where they're throwing spaghetti against the wall or something that they're truly excited about. And you need that excitement from whoever represents you. All right, let's see. Hamlin says, along the lines of a reasonable book budget, about how many copies of a book does a traditional publisher expect to sell for it to earn out and be considered a success? Sorry, I know this is how long is a piece of string question. Oh gosh, well, I mean, I think it depends on several factors. One being, you know, the advance. It's going to be a lot easier to earn out a $30,000 advance than a $100,000 advance, right? So I think that, you know, in terms of, I'm just looking at the question again.
Well, I think about, just from personal experience, I don't want to jump in and try to answer it for you, but just thinking about that advance thing, I always like to joke that, like, for my first novel, the advance was basically enough for a weekend at Disney World.
Yeah.
And the advantages of that over time have been that it earns out faster, you know. So, and that was one of our conversations, is talking about an author agent dynamic, was like, I remember the shocking kind of news that hit me like a blow to the chest when you told me what that publisher was offering for that book. But there was a long involved bit of reasoning about why that actually might be a good thing. There were a lot of factors at play that weren't just financial too. There were relationship factors with the person who was interested in the book, was very much in love with the book, the editor, you know, who actually now works at your agency. So, so there's a lot there going on. That's all I'll add to that.
Yeah, and you know, I think instead of thinking about this question from a how many copies do I need to sell, because that truly is going to be wildly different depending on every single deal, and every single publisher. You know, the question is it, to Andy's point, especially when you're starting off in your career, be reasonable, you know, with yourself. Use various publishers sometimes as stepping stones, because maybe they're offering you a very slim advance and it's going to be very easy, you know, to earn that advance out and then show a larger publisher, hey, sales were really good and I've built up a following. And you know, maybe there were a lot of foreign sales. Maybe there was a great response to the audiobook, you know, and maybe there were a large amount of factors that made that initial book successful with a smaller, quieter publisher. And maybe you end up loving that publisher so much that you end up working with them on subsequent novels, or maybe you're going to do some books for them and then try, you know, the next level of publishing, if you want to think of it kind of in tiers. And so I think that, especially if you're aiming high for a big 5 imprint, being able to show strong sales with a smaller or mid-sized publisher absolutely works in your favor, and is a good way to break in, because it is incredibly competitive and very hard. And I have seen situations where a new debut author is picked up by a larger publisher and they have these pie in the sky dreams, you know, for this author, and they have a huge marketing budget and they do all of this publicity and the advance is massive, and then for whatever reason it tanks. And that is like one of the fastest ways to kill a career, because then where do you go? It's either you stay with that publisher and for the next book they offer you maybe a much lower advance, or maybe they cancel you and say, well, I'm so sorry it didn't work out with us and I wish you all the best, you know, going with whichever publisher you partner with subsequently. But that can be really hard because then publishers have access to sales figures. And so if it doesn't do well, you're kind of up a creek without a paddle. And so I know this isn't exactly your question, Hamlin, but I think the point that I'm trying to get across here is, to me, in my mind, it's much better sometimes to take the lower number if you know that it's a publisher who's really going to be supporting you. And sometimes it's a lower number and the publisher doesn't have a ton of support. And so then you have to lean on your agent to figure out creative ways of getting those sales. But I think you have to look at it less from a perspective of how many copies am I trying to sell here from the very early stages, and more, you know, what can various publishers do for me, and do they believe in my work, and are they offering me an advance that isn't going to be crazy to essentially pay back before you start earning royalties on top of it and prove that, you know, sales are strong. Do we have time to answer Randy's question?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm typing something.
Okay, so Andy is typing a response.
So Randy asked, I recently spoke with a self-publishing company that told me they could help market my book, even though I have no intention of self-publishing. Do you recommend this approach? No, is the short answer. I mean, I would need more information. If your intention is not to self-publish, then I'm not really sure. It sounds like why is this self-publishing company also offering marketing services? I don't know enough about this entity to really offer solid advice, but to me, it sounds like you want to go the traditional route of querying agents. So maybe do that before throwing money at someone who might not do what they say they're going to do. I'm just not sure. Yeah, Andy.
My advice is I listen to my agent. So she said no, I say no too.
Cool. All right, have we talked everyone's ears off? Or is everyone tired of the sound of our voices?
No, this has been a wonderful session. I do want to remind everybody that we're at 1 o'clock right now, and we have a lunchtime chat that's set up from 1 until 2 o'clock. And so it's time to take a break there, and you can meet up with members of the Broadleaf team and some of the guest authors that will be attending. It's sort of an open forum. So if you want to split off from the main discussion, also there's an opportunity for you to go into a private breakout room to have a conversation. So I just recommend you stop by. The link you can find for lunchtime chat is in your conference program. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Crystal. You're the best.
Oh, you're the best.
Yeah.
And thanks everyone for attending.
Yeah, Andy, I'll talk to you soon because we talk all the time. So good deal.
Right.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.